For further insight into the situation in Nicaragua, we're joined by our colleague, anchor Edy Rodríguez Morel of EWTN Noticias, our Spanish language newscast. Thank you so much for being with us, Edy. The regime has forbidden Catholic processions, imprisoned priests, and physically attacked and desecrated churches throughout the country. How long has this been going on?
Well, 2018 is the year when everything takes a turn for the worse, when things hadn't been really so good beforehand. Ortega came back to power in 2007. At first, before he regained power, he tried to approach the church in a friendly manner to in some way assure or reassure the Nicaraguan population, which trusts the church very much. But since he went into power, he's just been on a plan to basically never leave. And in 2018, there was a widespread protest because of a reform in the national pension plan. And as a result of this, the crackdown started with over 300 documented human rights violations, disappearances, murders, tortures. And of course, at that moment, the church sided with the people who were being persecuted because of these crimes. But Ortega started to categorize the church as an enemy of the state, and the biggest enemy was perhaps the most vocal bishop of all, Bishop Rolando Alvarez, who was finally, arrested along with other people who have been sentenced. They have all been charged with the same charges, but Bishop Alvarez has been put aside on house arrest. The other ones have been sent to a prison, which is known for political torture.
And it's very hard to find out the details of all of this because the government keeps it close in hand. But this persecution of the Catholic Church, it's not very new in Latin America. I know that you understand this from the history of Catholicism as siding with those who are persecuted and then being cracked down by the government. What led up to this 2007, 2018, these movements? Is this something new in Nicaragua?
We have to just go back a little bit and talk about the Somoza family, which had basically governed dictatorially Nicaragua for 40 years with the support of the American government as an alternative to a communist regime. But the Sandinista Front of Liberation, as that's what they call themselves, started to get good press, finally internationally, because Somoza was very brutal in the way he was cracking down in this cleanup operations where they were just disappearing thousands of people who were opposed to the regime. And so when they came into power, they were recognized by the international community, most of the countries, as a legitimate government. They initially set up a junta, which included people from the private sector and also people from the Sandinistas. But the people from the private sector left soon after that because they realized that this was a project that was being led by Cuba, by the Castro regime, to basically lead Nicaragua along the path of a communist revolution. And this eventually led to Ortega, who became the president and the leader of the junta, taking retaliation against those parts of the church that did not side with him. I remember having a student body president at the time in the early 80s when I was going to college in the States, who had gone to Nicaragua. He said, "Man, this is a wonderful revolution and it's very Catholic." Why would he say that? Because there were some Catholic priests in prominent positions in the government who were, of course, working for the agenda, this liberation theology mindset of people in the church who were cooperating with the regime. When John Paul II came in 1983 to visit Nicaragua, he basically called one of them to order, and then the final mass became a political rally in support of the revolution. John Paul II had to call the people to be quiet, that the church wanted peace. And finally, John Paul II would refer to this first trip to Nicaragua as a dark night that he had to go through when he once again visited in 1996. So once again, there were people in the church who were very ideological because of this liberation theology line, and they were being favored by the state as the right kind of church. Of course, people who were holding the doctrine were being persecuted from the first time the regime was in power, the Sandinista regime, which fell from power in 1990 and came back to power in 2007 after a public relations campaign Ortega to approach the church in a friendly manner, which of course was part of his strategy only.
Of course. And you mentioned Cuba, which is something that we've seen before with the Cuban regime registering churches. It's not just Catholics that are engaged in this. How are other religions engaged in this revolution?
Well, Ortega has taken a friendly attitude towards evangelical groups in the country, which have abstained from criticizing the government's human rights abuses. So therefore, there doesn't seem to be too much of a voice from other Christians to defend the people who are being persecuted in a brutal way by the regime. And that makes them a preferable religious option for the state who does not criticize the evangelicals. And also being that some of the church leaders have try to maintain a kind of working relationship with the government. Some of the Nicaraguans are confused about what line they should have, whether they should be friendly or whether they should really be concerned of the fact that Bishop Orlando Alvarez, he's not being mentioned in a public way by other church leaders right now, probably because of fear of reprisals.
Fear has severe consequences. Thank you so much, Edy.
You're welcome. Glad to be with you.